princess was so ugly that painters from her home country had to use 16th century Instagram filters to make her feel pretty for King Henry VIII. Anne of Cleves was the fourth wife of the notorious divorcee, and her marriage and life are a bit overshadowed by the spectacles of his other marriages. Nevertheless, she was an astonishing woman of her time that not many had the chance to do. Be married to Henry VIII and live to talk about it. Her leverage in that marriage game of Russian roulette was that Anne wasn't, let's say, pleasant to the eyes. Or did she? What was Anne of Cleves like? Why did she marry Henry VIII? What was the rest of her life? And what did she do in her spare time? Spoiler alert, she had vices. Stay until the end of this video and find everything you need to know about one of the English queens among the shortest marriages in British royal history. And also some dirty little secrets from the royal bedchamber. And no, we won't talk about who had to wear a mask during their bed hours, although Henry's appearance wasn't as appealing in his later life. Let's start our journey through a lovely 16th century England, full of murders, conspiracies, violence, and sex. But this is the story about Anne of Cleves, so there won't be as many murders, conspiracies, violence, and sex. Anne of Cleves didn't come from the first lineup of European royalty, but her family was very important to England at the time of the Reformation movement. She was born in Dusseldorf, part of the Duchy of Cleves, in 1515, although there are two possible dates for her birth. We are talking about 16th century Europe, one of the most developed parts of the world at that time, and we don't know her date of birth, which is kind of logical. Then why on earth do some people think that they can find the Holy Grail, Noah's Ark, or Longines Spear? Oh right, they only want attention and money. Alright then, it makes sense. Anyway, she was a sister of the Duke of Cleves, whose nickname was the Rich, and also one of the leaders of the Protestant movement in Germany. I wonder which suitable Protestant bachelor needs allies in Germany. The timing was perfect, since Anne's betrothal was broken a few years before and Henry became widowed again. This time by natural causes, not by Henry, like Anne Boleyn. Did I say Henry? I meant Axe. Marriage was in everybody's interest since Germany was religiously unstable after the German Peasants' War in 1525, and Cleves needed a strong ally. Some historians call the German Peasants' War the second biggest German shame after the one every German doesn't like to talk about. You know what I mean, the infamous German defeat on home soil against England, 1-5 in 2001. But let's get back to Cleves, whose duke was in an awful relationship with Emperor Charles V, because both wanted to rule over northern parts of today's Netherlands. Chief Minister Thomas Cromwell, the one who helped Anne Boleyn meet the previously mentioned Axe, this time helped Henry VIII to arrange the marriage. With Cromwell, the king sent a painter to make a portrait of Anne and her sister from him to choose a bride. Since Anne of Cleves looked very pretty in the painting, he decided to marry her. And Cromwell had some nice words about her beauty. And then Anne of Cleves came to England. And after that moment, everything went south for her as queen. She actually went to the northwest, but you know what I mean. They met for the first time in Kent, and to honour the tradition, Henry VIII came to meet her in disguise, because true love will see through any mask. Yes, my stomach turned upside down when I said this line. Sorry, guys. As expected, this didn't go well, because she didn't recognise the king and refused his kiss. And the king thought she was ugly. Henry was furious at the painter and Cromwell, who put political interest before Henry's, bedchamber interest. I like her not, in Henry's words. She was very different from his three wives. She wasn't tiny, but strong and tall with a dominant nose. And now I'm imagining those East German discus throwers from the 80s. Yes, that's the one. And the story of an ugly queen started from there. We must appreciate the irony when Henry VIII called someone gross and ugly. The marriage preparations continued to avoid diplomatic incidents, and a few months later, Anne of Cleves became Queen of England. And this is where the fun begins. Do I need to say that the painter couldn't find any job, and Cromwell soon went to the Tower? But let's get back to the loving couple. The yellow press would be proud of me, but we have all the information from the first wedding night with photos and videos. Okay, without photos and videos. I will tell you the story of the two most incompatible lovers in history. Henry thought Anne wasn't a virgin and even had problems with her smell. Yes, Henry VIII, who had a smelly rotten leg and was so obese that his neck was last seen decades ago. Also, Henry Head and Shoulders didn't like her breasts because they were too loose for his taste. But that's not all that was loose. Let's just say that his arrow wasn't straight anymore. So there was no consummation of marriage, luckily for Anne, but not for Jabba the Hutt. And by her words, Anne thought she was pregnant because of Henry's kisses, touch, and goodnights. What a perfect couple. Henry wanted to annul this marriage and only needed a pretext. Thomas Cromwell, who was jailed in the Tower, came up with an idea that she was already married. We are talking about her betrothal from decades ago. That idea didn't save Cromwell's skin. Anne of Cleves agreed to that, and Henry was already in love with Catherine Howard, his next queen. We don't know why she accepted to annul the marriage, but many think she remembered the last Anne who married Henry and what happened to her. In my opinion, you only need to imagine what Henry looked like. Or watch the beginning of Return of the Jedi. Yes, again, Jabba the Hutt. At one party, Anne even danced with the next queen, so there were no hard feelings whatsoever. Henry was grateful, and they stayed friends till the end of his life. And Anne was greatly rewarded for not making any trouble. Anne never returned to continental Europe because she didn't want to depend on her brother. And Henry gave her Richmond Palace to live in, and also some other properties. Anne of Cleves never married again, although she was a candidate for Henry's wife number 6, which was her brother's idea. I don't think Anne supported that, but she had to pretend she was disappointed when Henry VIII chose Catherine Parr. Instead of marrying the same monster again, Anne spent the rest of her life enjoying beer and gambling. Yep, she had 4 kings. I wonder if Henry outweighed all 4 of them together. All her maids loved her, and everyone had a high opinion of her. After Henry's death, Queen Mary and Elizabeth Tudor visited Anne from time to time. Sadly, she was remembered in history as ugly. But was she really that ugly, or was it just a pretext of a man with the lazy flamingo? We know that, according to the portrait of Anne of Cleves, Henry VIII decided to swipe right. Which brings us to Instagram filters. Why on earth does anyone do that? I know what you look like, but in the case of Anne of Cleves, we must consult all her portraits. And if you look closely, there's not much difference between them. She was, in fact, very appealing, and some may even say beautiful. And now we have a complete recreation of Slave Leia and Jabba the Hutt. All jokes aside, history was very unjust to this woman, whose only sin was that she was married to someone who had a type, and Anne didn't fit it. Also, he couldn't free his willy with her. Anne of Cleves was a victim of political games that dictated countries' interests before private or love life. Although she respected that rule and Henry VIII didn't, Anne didn't cause him any trouble. She quietly moved from the spotlights, which possibly saved her life. And maybe even the religion in England. We all know what happened the first time when Henry VIII wanted a divorce. Imagine this possible outcome. I, Henry VIII, the highest priest of Thor, god of thunder, Hulk, and Iron Man, grant King Henry VIII a divorce. Also, Henry VIII didn't deserve such a lady.